Today on the North Shore Drive podcast, we have a lot to discuss. First, we talk with Ray Fittipaldo because there's a lot of confidence in what Arthur Smith is doing. We'll talk about his article on the offense and what Arthur Smith's done early in Steelers OTAs right here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Let's get into it.
You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter.
Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Ray Fittipaldo, one of our great Steelers beat writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. As always, you can read our work at post-gazette.com, and you can find all of our podcasts by searching Post-Gazette Sports on your favorite podcasting app or on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to go on Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as our daily content that comes out from all of our different sports writers. And as always, this show is brought to you by Mike's Beer Bar, the best bar in all of Pittsburgh. When you go to Mike's Beer Bar, you can experience one of 500 different available beers. 300 of those beers are from the local Pittsburgh area, and 80 of those local beers are available on tap, and you can see new ones being switched out every single day. Ray, it seems like in OTAs, there is a bit of confidence in the offense that things will be different this year, simply because of how things have been structured and the way that the players are talking about how Arthur Smith is coaching them. You wrote a story about how the Steelers are embracing new offensive coordinator Arthur Smith and his old school run first offense. When we talked to Dan Moore this week, he said that this is more like an O-line friendly system, and it seems across the board. Like you talked to Broderick Jones, it's Troy Fautanu, who said that there was like a PowerPoint presentation that Arthur Smith had about like, hey, these are the things we have to do if we want to play football the way we want to. It seems like that message has definitely got across, and at least in OTAs, the practices have been very pointed to get them in that direction, even without putting on the pads.
Yeah, I mean, listen, one thing Dan Moore said, in those comments was, we don't want those edge rushers and those defensive linemen peeling back their ears and rushing the passer 45 times a game. So when you think of it in that way, Chris, if the Steelers are able to orchestrate their offense in the way they want to, they'll be keeping teams like that on their heels, and they'll be able to dictate the pace of the game. So I think that's the entire idea of it. And one thing I noticed is a big difference so far. I know it's only the spring, but how many times did we walk into that locker room early last season, Chris, and no one on that offense, no one on the offensive line, no one at receiver, no one at running back knew what the offensive identity was?
Yep.
That's not going to be an issue. I mean,
right.
The Steelers might struggle to run the ball early this year, but they're going to try to run the ball every single game because that's who they want to be. So exactly. I just think the fact that they know who they want to be is going to help this team. And I think that's what Dan and Broderick and some of those other guys were talking about this week. I think, people thought it was going to be a good fit with Arthur Smith. And, we're really not going to know until September, October. But, it certainly seems like these players are buying into what he's selling right now.
I think that even of itself, just knowing what they're supposed to do, it's such an important thing for what this offense needs to do for next year. And listen, I know there's some people out there thinking like, oh, well, this is the NFL of the modern days, and it's 2024. You can't do a run first offense. And I think the Steelers are trying to zig where other teams are zagging. Talking about how a lot of teams are opting for pass first offenses and are, when they get that super franchise quarterback, that's how they build their team. But the Steelers recognize like, hey, we don't got that guy right now. And but what you do have is a lot of early draft pick investments in the offensive line, to guards that you invested in that have produced for you. You have a 1-2 punch at running back, and with that you have a physical style of ball that you can play. And even without all of this new offensive line playing with just one of those guys, Broderick Jones, not including Fautanu or Frazier because they just got here. In the last 10 games of the season last year, they rushed for the second most yards in the NFL and second most yards per game as well. Like they had something going, and that was still when Mason Cole and Dan Moore were starting on this offense, and without a Russell Wilson or a Justin Fields or an Arthur Smith to help guide it along.
Yeah, listen, and you mentioned them zigging when other teams are zagging. There have been other teams that have had success with run-based offenses. Look at Kyle Shanahan and what he's done in San Francisco. He's gotten to 2 Super Bowls with Jimmy Garoppolo and Brock Purdy as his quarterback. I mentioned the Detroit Lions in my article with Jared Goff. And, somebody came at me in my email and said, Jared Goff was the 5th rated passer in the NFL. He threw for X number of yards. Well, this is the same Jared Goff that the LA Rams decided they couldn't win a Super Bowl with. So did the Lions running game make Jared Goff, or did Jared Goff make that offense? I tend to think that run-based offense with Jahmyr Gibbs and Devin Montgomery did a lot of good for Jared Goff. So, you could skew the stats any way you want. The point is Jared Goff isn't Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen. There's only 5 or 7 of those guys in the NFL right now. And you're right. The Steelers don't have that guy. They're hoping to do it with either Russell Wilson or Justin Fields. You absolutely need a running game, and you probably need a top 5 or a top 7 running game to be a factor in the AFC playoffs this year.
And to your point, the Lions had the 5th most rushing yards in the NFL last year, and were able to do that, and that led to them. Yes, they did throw the ball for a lot of yards too, but I think that was all set up, like you said, by they had Frank Ragnow, they had Penei Sewell, they had an offensive line that was kicking butt, and a 1-2 punch at running back that was kicking butt, and I think that's where the Steelers see, like, hey, you can be like this team, you could be like the Lions or the Niners, and even the Eagles at times when they were playing well, they had a run game that was going because their offensive line was kicking butt. So I look at this and I see a lot of advantages that could work out for the Steelers and this, and I think you highlighted a lot of them pretty well in your article. And I hear all these things, but I know there's a lot of people saying, like, hey man, like, we saw Kenny Pickett throw 1 billion touchdowns in preseason last year. Everyone said this offense was figured out, even with Matt Canada. I don't believe it until I see it. And listen, I get that. But I think part of the thing here is that everyone was acknowledging, even with that preseason success, that there were questions about the offense, that there was a little bit of unsurety of how it would develop. There is not any unsurety. Everyone is very sure, like, hey, that's what we want. This is what we want to be. There's a vision, and they're attacking that vision. And these practices, even in OTAs with just football and shorts, it has been more focused on that to get them there. I think the players who've seen who've seen what it was like the last few years, they are all appreciating it, and they're expressing it to us after these practices.
Yeah, listen, the Steelers didn't win a Super Bowl when Le'Veon Bell was their running back, but just think about how effective those offenses were when Le'Veon Bell and D'Angelo Williams were doing their thing, right? I mean, it was fun to watch. I mean, they could do whatever they wanted to teams. Teams want to shut down the running game. Boom, we're going to throw it to Antonio Brown and Martavis Bryant. You want to take them away? We'll gouge you in the running game. And I think that's the goal for the Steelers this year. Certainly teams are going to come out and say, okay, we know you want to run the ball. We're going to put 8 guys in the box. And that's when George Pickens and Pat Freiermuth and the other receivers in that room have to step up and take advantage of that. So, one other thing I was thinking of, Chris, Gibbs was 55 yards away from 1,000. The Lions almost had 2 1,000-yard rushers. The Steelers weren't that far off. Najee had over 1,000 yards. Jaylen Warren had 784, I think. With more touches this year, is it that far-fetched to think that the Steelers couldn't have 2 1,000-yard rushers or close to it?
I don't think so.
It's only happened one time in franchise history. That was Franco Harris and Rocky Bleier in 1976. The last time it happened in the NFL, with a running back tandem, not a running back and a quarterback, a running back tandem, D'Angelo Williams and Jonathan Stewart back in 2009. So it's been a while. I know Lamar Jackson did it a couple of years ago with one of the Ravens running backs, but to have 2 running backs get to 1,000 yards would be a big deal for the Steelers, and I honestly don't think they're that far away from it.
I mean, like you said, they were close to it last year, and the offense was discombobulated and figuring things out until the last 3 games of the season. So I think that there's a lot to that, and it will be something that we keep an eye on here as OTAs continue. OTAs are done for the weekend, but they resume next week with the final week of OTAs and then mini camps. So then we'll get those, and then the Steelers will have their long break to training camp. But again, even without the pads going on, and we're not saying this offense is going to be the number one rushing offense or anything like that, but there is a confidence building within these players, and that's something we haven't seen in the Steelers offense in many years of you covering them, Ray. Thanks, Ray Fittipaldo, for joining us here in the North Shore Drive podcast. A reminder, this show is brought to you by Mike's Beer Bar, the best bar in Pittsburgh. When you go to Mike's Beer Bar, they're on Federal Street, right across the street from PNC Park. You can go there. They have over 500 different available beers. 300 of those beers are from the local Pittsburgh area, and 80 of those local beers are available on tap every day. And they're also switching new ones in and out, so you always get new experiences from all the different craft breweries here in Pittsburgh. They also have over 20 televisions, so you can watch whatever sporting event. The NHL and NBA finals are coming up. If the Pirates are out of town, you can catch them there. And also they have amazing food like Steak on a Stone, where you get your choice cut of steak brought to you on a heated stone. Every time you cut off a piece, you just press it into that stone and you choose how well done you want every single bite of your steak. And that's at Mike's Beer Bar, the best bar in Pittsburgh. Go there today. When you get there, tell them Chris sent you.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you're watching this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down below in the description.